The great hall of the Galactic Concord had never known such silence, and the 17 elder species who ruled the stars sat frozen in their seats as the holographic display showed world after world burning in the endless dark of space. Ambassador Desernine of the Yovani Collective stood at the center of the chamber, her blue skin glowing with patterns of fear and despair that her people could not hide. And her voice shook as she spoke to the assembled leaders, who had ruled this galaxy for 12,000 years without challenge. "We have lost 14 star systems in 3 months," she declared. And the words hung in the air like a death sentence. "The Kethmari homeworld is gone, and not a single survivor escaped to tell us what happened there." The hologram shifted to show a massive black ship, organic and terrible, covered in spines and weapons that seemed to grow from its living hull like tumors on a dying beast. "The Virith," Desernine continued. "They came from the void between galaxies, from the empty darkness where no species has ever traveled. And they do not speak to us or answer our calls for peace." Elder Cromoth of the Silacine race shifted his massive crystalline body, and the sound echoed through the chamber like grinding stones. And when he spoke, his voice was deep and ancient. "Our combined fleets have engaged them 7 times, he rumbled. 7 times we have sent our greatest warships against their forces, and 7 times they have crushed us without effort, learning from every weapon we use and adapting their armor to resist it within seconds." A younger delegate from the Voss hegemony rose from his seat, his feathered crest rising in agitation as he shouted, "Then we must build new weapons, develop new strategies, find some weakness in their biology that we can exploit." "There is no time," Desernine replied sadly. "Their fleet approaches the Threlian homeworld as we speak. And after Threlia falls, there is nothing between the Virith and this very station, the heart of our civilization." The silence returned, heavier than before, and every being in that room understood what she was saying without her needing to speak the words aloud. They were going to die, and there was nothing they could do to stop it. Elder Cromoth spoke again, and this time there was something strange in his voice, something that might have been shame or fear or perhaps desperate hope. "There is one option we have not considered," he said slowly. "One species we have deliberately avoided contacting for 200 years. The reaction was immediate and intense, with delegates shouting and rising from their seats in protest, their various forms of expressing outrage filling the chamber with noise and chaos. "You cannot mean the humans," the Voss delegate spat. "Those primitive, violent creatures who achieved faster than light travel barely 2 centuries ago? The same humans we quarantined for the safety of the entire galaxy?" Another voice called out, "The ones whose history is nothing but war after war, conflict after conflict, blood spilled for reasons we cannot even comprehend." Desernine raised her hands for silence, and slowly the chamber grew quiet again, though the tension remained thick enough to taste. "I have studied the humans," she admitted, "as part of our monitoring efforts to ensure they remained contained in their small corner of space. And what I learned disturbed me greatly." She touched a control, and the hologram changed to show a small blue and green world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. "Earth," she said, "their homeworld, a planet so dangerous that most of their species died from disease and predators and natural disasters before they ever developed technology. This only proves our wisdom in isolating them," the Voss delegate interrupted. "Perhaps," Desernine agreed, "but consider this carefully before you dismiss the idea completely. Because in the 200 years since they achieved space travel, they have advanced technologically faster than any species in recorded history." She pulled up data streams that flowed across the display, numbers and charts that made several delegates gasp in shock. "We believed they were primitive because we refused to look closely," she continued. "We placed sensors at the edge of their quarantine zone and assumed we knew everything we needed to know about them. But our sensors have detected energy signatures from their space that we cannot identify or explain. What kind of signatures? Kromoth asked, leaning forward with sudden interest. Unknown, Desser9 admitted. Completely unknown. Using principles of physics that our scientists say should be impossible. And yet the readings are there, growing stronger every year. The chamber fell into thoughtful silence as the implications sank into every mind present. You are suggesting, the Voss delegate said slowly, that the humans may have developed weapons capable of fighting the Vrith? I am suggesting that we have no other choice but to ask them, Desser9 replied firmly. Our fleets are broken, our worlds are burning, and in 3 days the Vrith will reach Threlia, and after that nothing can stop them from destroying everything we have built. She looked around the chamber at the faces of beings who had ruled the galaxy for longer than most species had existed. We can die with our pride intact, she said quietly, or we can swallow that pride and ask for help from the very species we rejected and isolated and called barbaric. The vote took only minutes, and when it was done, Desser9 herself composed a message that would be sent to Earth. It was simple and direct, explaining the threat and requesting any assistance humanity could provide, and it was transmitted on every frequency they could reach. The Concord expected to wait days or weeks for a response, if one came at all. They received an answer in 47 minutes. The message was short, delivered in a calm female voice that somehow carried weight and authority across the vast distances of space. This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Nations ship Prometheus, flagship of Earth's 3rd Expeditionary Fleet, and we have received your request for assistance against the Vrith threat. A pause, and then the voice continued with words that would echo through history. We are already on our way, and we suggest you tell your remaining forces to clear the area around Threlia, because when we arrive, things are going to get very interesting very quickly. In the Great Hall of the Galactic Concord, 17 elder species looked at each other with a mixture of hope and terror, wondering what exactly they had just unleashed upon the galaxy. Admiral Helena Vance stood on the command bridge of the UNS Prometheus and read the Concord's desperate message for the 3rd time, her gray eyes reflecting the blue glow of the holographic display as a small smile crossed her weathered face. So they finally need us, she said quietly, and her voice carried a weight of 200 years of human patience and preparation. Commander James Chun, her second-in-command, stepped forward with a datapad in his hands and asked, "Orders, Admiral?" Helena Vance turned to face the massive view screen that showed Earth floating in the darkness behind them, beautiful and blue and completely unaware that humanity was about to announce itself to a galaxy that had tried to forget they existed. "Signal the entire 3rd Fleet," she commanded. "All 3,000 ships are to begin quantum slip preparations immediately, and I want every captain on a secure channel in 10 minutes. Chen's eyes widened slightly at the number, even though he knew it well, because hearing it spoken aloud still filled him with something close to awe. 3,000 warships, built in secret over 2 centuries, hidden in bases carved into asteroids and moons throughout human space, waiting for the day when humanity would need them. The Concord had placed their sensors at the edge of human space and assumed they knew everything worth knowing about the primitive newcomers, but they had made a terrible mistake in their arrogance. They had only watched the border, never looking deeper into human territory where the real work was being done. "Fleet channel open, Admiral," the communications officer reported. Helena Vance straightened her uniform and faced the screen as it split into thousands of smaller images, each one showing the face of a ship captain waiting for her words. "Captains of the 3rd Fleet," she began. 200 years ago, the Galactic Concord looked at humanity and saw nothing but a violent primitive species that needed to be contained for the safety of the galaxy. She paused and let the words sink in before continuing. "They drew a line around our space and told us to stay inside it, never bothering to check if we were actually obeying their commands. And do you know what we did in response? A fierce pride entered her voice as she answered her own question. We built the most powerful military force this galaxy has ever seen. Not because we wanted revenge for their insults, but because we knew that someday something terrible would come out of the darkness between stars. And when it did, someone would need to stop it. The faces on the screens showed no surprise, because every captain in the fleet had been trained from childhood for this moment, selected and educated specifically to command these ships when the time came. That day has arrived, Vance continued. A species called the Virith has emerged from the void between galaxies, and they are destroying everything in their path. And the mighty Galactic Concord that thought itself invincible has discovered that it is very, very mortal. She allowed herself another small smile. They have asked us for help. The same humans they called barbaric and dangerous and unfit for civilized company. And we are going to give them that help, because that is who we are. In the engineering section of the Prometheus, Chief Engineer Maria Santos ran her hands over the quantum slip drive that hummed with power beyond anything the Concorde had ever imagined. The drive did not push ships through space like the primitive faster-than-light engines the elder races used, but instead folded space itself, allowing vessels to step from one point to another instantly regardless of the distance involved. It had taken humanity 80 years to develop the theory and another 60 to build a working prototype, and now every ship in the fleet carried one. In the weapons bay, Gunnery Chief Thomas Wright checked the status of weapons that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously, weapons that could strike a target before the target even knew it was being aimed at. Directed singularity warheads that created tiny black holes, lasting only microseconds, but causing devastation beyond measure. Dimensional shear beams that cut through any material by attacking it across multiple planes of existence. And reality anchors that could freeze an enemy ship in place by locking its position in space-time. These were not weapons designed to fight other civilizations. These were weapons designed to kill gods. On the bridge, Admiral Vance finished her address to the fleet. The Virith have never faced humanity, and they have no idea what is coming for them. But they are about to learn a lesson that every predator eventually learns. Her voice dropped to something cold and hard and absolutely certain. Never corner something that is more dangerous than you. She turned to Commander Chun and nodded once. Signal all ships to engage quantum slip drives on my mark. Destination is the Thrullian system. And tell them to arrive in combat formation because we will be dropping directly into a war zone. Chun relayed the orders, and across 3,000 ships, men and women of every nationality and background prepared themselves for battle, checking weapons and armor and saying quiet prayers to whatever powers they believed might be listening. Admiral Vance looked at the image of Earth one final time and thought of all the humans who had lived and died throughout history, fighting wars and building civilizations and reaching for the stars even when the universe seemed determined to crush them. Every one of those struggles had led to this moment, to this fleet, to this chance to prove that humanity deserved its place among the stars. All ships report ready, Admiral, Chun announced. Helena Vance sat down in her command chair and gripped the armrests with steady hands. Then let us go introduce ourselves to the Virith, she said calmly. Engage quantum slip drives now. 3,000 ships vanished from Earth's orbit in the same instant, leaving nothing behind but ripples in space-time and a message transmitted to every human settlement in existence. The message was simple, and it spread across human space faster than light could travel, carried by quantum communication networks that the Concorde did not know existed. The fleet has launched, and humanity goes to war. On Earth and Mars and the colonies of Jupiter's moons, people stopped what they were doing and looked up at the sky, knowing that somewhere out there among the stars, their fleet was racing toward a battle that would determine the future of their species. And in the void between Threlia and Earth, space folded and twisted as 3,000 vessels, carrying humanity's fury and hope, crossed distances that should have taken years in the span of a single heartbeat. The Virith had consumed 3 galaxies before this one, and in all that time, spanning billions of years, they had never known defeat because defeat was simply not something their species could comprehend. Hive Admiral Kethvix commanded the primary invasion tendril from the massive bioship called Endless Consumption, a living vessel 300 kilometers long that pulsed with dark energy and bristled with weapons grown from its own flesh. Through the hive-mind connection that linked every Virith in existence, Kethvix could feel the thoughts of 15,000 ships and the billions of warriors they carried, all of them hungry and eager for the harvest that awaited them at Threlia. "Report the status of the prey," Kethvix commanded, and his voice echoed through chambers of living tissue that served as the ship's bridge. His lieutenant, a smaller Virith whose body was designed for sensory processing rather than combat, clicked its mandibles as it interpreted the data flowing through the organic sensor network. 800 enemy vessels have gathered in defensive formation around the planet, the lieutenant reported. They appear to be the combined remnants of multiple species fleets, likely the last significant military force in this region of the galaxy. Kethvix felt something that might have been amusement ripple through his consciousness, and the sensation spread through the hive mind until every Virith in the fleet shared in his contempt for these foolish prey creatures. "They gather together as if numbers will save them," he observed. "How many times have we seen this exact behavior from species facing extinction?" "Countless times, Hive Admiral, and it has never changed the outcome." The Virith fleet moved through space like a swarm of locusts descending on a field of grain, their bioships pulsing with eager anticipation as they approached the Concorde's defensive line. Aboard the Concorde flagship Eternal Vigilance, Fleet Commander Thros of the Drovian species watched the approaching nightmare with all 4 of his eyes and felt despair settling into his heart. He had commanded fleets for 300 years and had never lost a battle until the Virith appeared. And now he had lost 5 battles in a row and watched thousands of ships under his command be torn apart by enemies that learned and adapted faster than any species had the right to. "All ships report ready, Commander," his tactical officer announced, though there was no hope in her voice. "Then we will fight," Thros replied heavily. "Not because we can win, but because surrender is not something the Virith accept. And I would rather die with weapons firing than be harvested like livestock." The Concorde fleet opened fire first, 800 ships unleashing everything they had in a desperate attempt to stop the Virith advance. Plasma lances burned across space in streams of superheated destruction. Kinetic accelerators hurled projectiles at fractions of the speed of light, and missile swarms numbering in the millions raced toward the enemy fleet. The Virith did not slow down or take invasive action because they did not need to. Their bioships had armor that was alive, armor that could analyze any weapon that struck it and grow resistant within seconds, armor that had been perfected over billions of years of consuming civilizations across multiple galaxies. The first wave of Concorde weapons struck the Virith fleet and caused absolutely no damage at all. Plasma fire splashed against hulls that absorbed the heat and converted it to energy. Kinetic projectiles bounced off surfaces that hardened at the moment of impact, and missiles were intercepted by organic point defense systems that fired spines of bone-like material with perfect accuracy. "They are adapting," the tactical officer reported with growing horror. "Every weapon we use becomes useless within seconds of making contact." Commander Thros closed his eyes briefly and then opened them with grim determination. "Continue firing," he ordered. "Perhaps we can force them to adapt to so many weapons that they reach some kind of limit." But there was no limit, and the Virith had proven this truth to hundreds of species before the Concord. Hive Admiral Kethvix felt the prey's weapons washing over his fleet like rain and scent. A simple command through the hive mind. Begin the harvest. 15,000 bioships open fire simultaneously, and the space between the fleets filled with organic projectiles and energy beams and living torpedoes that sought out enemy vessels with predatory intelligence. The Concord ships tried to evade, but the Virith weapons were too fast and too accurate. Guided by a hive mind that could process tactical data from every ship in the fleet and coordinate attacks with perfect precision. The first Concord vessel to die was a Kathmari cruiser that took 17 hits in 2 seconds. Its shields overwhelmed and its hull torn open to vacuum. The second was a Drovian destroyer that vanished in a flash of released energy as its reactor was breached. The third and fourth and fifth followed within heartbeats, and then the killing became too fast to count. Commander Thros watched his fleet dying around him and felt tears running down his scaled face as ships he had commanded for decades were torn apart like paper in a storm. "Signal the retreat," he ordered quietly. "Any ship that can escape should jump to faster than light immediately. There's nothing more we can do here." The surviving Concord vessels began to flee, their drives pushing them toward the safety of faster-than-light travel. But even that was not fast enough. The Virith pursued with relentless hunger, catching ship after ship and tearing them apart before they could escape. Of the 800 ships that had formed the defensive line, only 93 managed to jump away, leaving Threlia completely undefended. Hive Admiral Kethvix savored the victory as he always did, feeling the satisfaction of the hunt ripple through the hive mind, and he began to issue orders for the harvesting of the planet below. But then his sensory lieutenant convulsed violently and made a sound that Kethvix had never heard from any Virith in his billions of years of existence. It was a sound of pure shock and something that might have been fear. "Hive Admiral," the lieutenant stammered. "Something is emerging from fold space. Many things, and their signatures are completely unknown to us." Kethvix turned his attention to the sensor data and felt the hive mind grow suddenly quiet as 15,000 ships tried to comprehend what they were seeing. Space was tearing open in thousands of places simultaneously, and from each tier emerged a vessel unlike anything the Virith had ever encountered in their long history of consumption. "What species do these ships belong to?" Kethvix demanded. "Unknown," the lieutenant replied with growing agitation. "Their configuration matches nothing in our records. Their energy signatures use principles we cannot identify, and their weapons are charging with power outputs that our sensors cannot accurately measure." For the first time in 3 billion years, the Virith hive mind experienced an emotion they had long forgotten: uncertainty. And high above Threlia, 3,000 human warships completed their emergence from quantum slip and began targeting every Virith vessel in the system. Admiral Helena Vance opened her eyes as the quantum slip transit completed, and immediately her neural link flooded her mind with tactical data from every ship in the Third Fleet. She could see the Virith formation spread across the space around Threlia. 15,000 bioships of various sizes clustered around the massive command vessel that her systems had already identified as the primary target. She could see the wreckage of the Concord fleet scattered like broken toys, debris fields marking the graves of ships that had tried to stand against an enemy they could not defeat. She could see the planet below, green and blue and beautiful, its billions of inhabitants waiting to discover if they would live or die in the next few minutes. And she could see the Virith ships beginning to turn toward her fleet, their organic weapons charging as they prepared to destroy this new threat the same way they had destroyed everything else. "AEGIs," she said calmly, addressing the artificial intelligence that served as her tactical partner. "Analysis of enemy fleet." The AI's voice was smooth and precise, speaking directly into her mind through the neural link. Enemy count confirmed at 15,206 bioships, with the command vessel designated as Priority Target Alpha, and all enemy vessels are currently attempting to adapt their sensors to our energy signatures. How long until they complete adaptation? Unknown, but based on observed adaptation rates from previous engagements, they will likely achieve targeting solutions within 12 to 15 seconds. Vance nodded slightly, a gesture no one could see, but which helped her focus her thoughts. 12 seconds for the Virith to figure out how to fight humanity. She intended to give them far less than that. Fleet status? She asked. All 3,000 ships report battle-ready, weapon locks achieved on all designated targets, and quantum synchronization is holding stable across the entire formation. Across the human fleet, men and women sat at their stations with hearts pounding and hands steady, each one knowing that the next few seconds would determine whether humanity lived or died. In the weapons bay of the Prometheus, Gunnery Chief Thomas Wright watched his displays with calm focus as targeting data flowed across the screens. His weapons were not like anything the galaxy had ever seen, designed by scientists who had spent generations asking a simple question. What if something comes that our weapons cannot hurt? The answer had been to develop weapons that operated on principles so fundamental that no adaptation could protect against them. Weapons that attacked the very fabric of reality rather than mere matter and energy. All weapon systems show green, Wright reported through his own neural link. Ready to fire on command. In the engine room, Chief Engineer Maria Santos monitored the quantum slip drive as it hummed with barely contained power. Ready to jump the ship out of danger if needed, or to power the reality anchors that would freeze enemy vessels in place. Drive stable, she reported. We can do this all day if we need to. On the bridge, Commander Chun watched the Admiral with something close to awe as she processed tactical data that would have overwhelmed any normal human mind. The neural link technology had been developed specifically for situations like this, allowing human commanders to think at speeds that matched the AI systems they partnered with. Admiral Vance made her decision in the span of a heartbeat. AEGIS, execute Omega-7 protocol, full fleet synchronization, and I want every Virith ship in this system erased from existence. Confirmed, AEGIS replied, engaging. What happened next would be studied by historians and scientists for centuries to come, and even with recordings slowed to 1 millionth speed, they would struggle to fully understand what they witnessed. Every human ship fired simultaneously, not in sequence, but in perfect quantum synchronization, their weapons existing across multiple points in space-time at the same instant. Directed singularity warheads materialized inside Virith bioships, creating microscopic black holes that tore the vessels apart from within before evaporating in bursts of radiation. Dimensional shear beams cut through organic armor by attacking it across 12-dimensional planes at once, slicing through material that had resisted every weapon the galaxy had ever produced. Reality anchors locked Virith ships in place while other weapons struck them, preventing any evasive action or defensive adaptation. And threading through all of this destruction came weapons that did not destroy matter so much as convince it that it had never existed, erasing Virith vessels from reality itself. Hive Admiral Kethvix had exactly enough time to understand what was happening before the endless consumption ceased to exist. The Virith adaptive armor tried desperately to respond to the attack, but there was nothing to adapt to because these weapons did not play by any rules the armor had been designed to counter. You cannot adapt to a black hole forming inside your ship. You cannot grow resistant to an attack that happens across dimensions you do not exist in. You cannot learn to survive being erased from reality. The bioships did not explode in the traditional sense, but instead came apart at the quantum level, their matter dissociating into constituent particles that scattered across the void of space. Through the hive mind, 15,000 ships experienced death simultaneously, and the psychic backlash rippled outward across the cosmos toward the Mirth homeworlds in the void between galaxies. And then it was over. Admiral Vance checked the tactical display and confirmed what her eyes already told her. Where 15,000 Virith bioships had floated moments before, there was now nothing but expanding clouds of particles and the fading echoes of weapons fire. Time from engagement start to enemy fleet elimination? She asked quietly. 7.83 seconds, AEGIS reported. Vance nodded once and then opened a channel to the remaining Concorde ships that had been fleeing toward the edge of the system. This is Admiral Helena Vance of the United Nations 3rd Expeditionary Fleet calling any surviving Concorde vessels. The Virith threat in this system has been neutralized, and you may cease your retreat. There was a long pause before a trembling voice responded. This is Commander Thross of the Eternal Vigilance. We watched what just happened, and we do not understand how it was possible. It was possible because humanity has spent 200 years preparing for exactly this moment, Vance replied calmly. And because we were afraid. Afraid? Thross asked with confusion. You just destroyed in seconds an enemy that has been annihilating our fleets for months. Yes, Vance agreed. Because fear is not weakness, Commander. Fear is what drives you to prepare for the worst possibilities. To build weapons against enemies you have not yet met. To never assume you are safe simply because nothing has threatened you recently. She looked at the empty space where the Virith fleet had been and felt no triumph. Only a grim satisfaction that the weapons her species had built had worked as designed. The Concorde forgot how to be afraid. She continued. You ruled this galaxy for so long that you forgot what it means to be prey, to be small, to know that something bigger and hungrier might be waiting in the dark. She paused and then added, Humanity never forgot, and that is why we were ready. Around her fleet, 3,000 ships held their positions in perfect formation, weapons still hot from firing, crews breathing sighs of relief as they realized they had survived. And on the planet below, billions of Threllians looked up at the sky and wept with joy, saved from extinction by a species they had never met and had been taught to fear. The battle for Threllia was over, and it had lasted less time than it took to draw a single breath. 3 days after the Battle of Threllia, Ambassador Desser-9 stood in the observation deck of the Concorde's capital station and stared at the human fleet holding position in the space beyond the viewport. 3,000 ships floated in perfect formation, their dark hulls reflecting the light of distant stars. And even from this distance she could feel the power contained within those vessels. Beside her stood Admiral Helena Vance, the human woman who had commanded the complete destruction of an enemy that had seemed utterly invincible only days before. 8 seconds, Desser-9 whispered, her bioluminescent skin flickering with patterns of awe and something that might have been fear. The enemy that broke our fleets and destroyed our worlds and drove us to the edge of extinction, and you ended them in 8 seconds. 7.83 seconds technically, Vance replied without any pride in her voice, though I suspect that number will be rounded up in the history books. Desser-9 turned to face the human admiral and studied her carefully, trying to understand the species that had just saved the galaxy. Vance was not physically impressive by Concorde standards. Shorter than most elder species and lacking any obvious natural weapons or defenses. But there was something in her eyes that made Desser-9 feel very small and very vulnerable. How? The ambassador asked. We had 12,000 years to develop our technology, and you had only 200. How could you possibly have built weapons capable of doing what we just witnessed? Vance was quiet for a long moment before she answered. Because you were never afraid, she said simply. You ruled this galaxy for so long that you forgot what it felt like to be prey, to look up at the night sky and wonder what might be looking back. She turned to gaze out at the stars, and her voice grew thoughtful. Humanity has never had that luxury, Ambassador, because we evolved on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. Surrounded by predators and diseases and natural disasters that culled our numbers again and again. Many species face such challenges, Desernine pointed out. Yes, but most species either adapt to become part of their environment or they go extinct. Whereas humanity did something different. We fought back. We refused to accept our place in the food chain. And we clawed our way to the top of our world through sheer stubborn refusal to die. Vance smiled slightly, though there was no humor in the expression. And when we finally reached the stars and discovered that we were not alone, do you know what our first reaction was? I assume you were excited to meet other intelligent life? We were terrified, Vance corrected her. Because if there were other species out there, then there might be predators too. Things that hunted between the stars, the same way wolves hunted in our forests and sharks hunted in our oceans. She gestured at the fleet beyond the viewport. So we prepared, quietly and secretly, building weapons against threats we had not yet encountered. Developing technology that could counter enemies we could only imagine. All while the Concord watched our borders and congratulated themselves on containing the primitive humans. Desernine felt a chill run through her, despite the comfortable temperature of the observation deck. You were preparing for the Virith specifically? We were preparing for anything, Vance replied. The Virith just happened to be the first real test of our preparations. And I am grateful that our weapons worked as designed, because we were not certain they would. The doors to the observation deck opened and delegates from every species of the Concord began filing in, summoned to this meeting by Ambassador Desernine. They gathered in a loose semicircle around the two women, and Desernine could see the mixture of emotions on their varied faces. Fear and gratitude and shame and curiosity, all blended together as they looked at the human who had saved their civilization. Elder Cromoth of the Silacine spoke first, his crystalline voice echoing through the chamber. Admiral Vance, on behalf of the Galactic Concord, I offer our deepest gratitude for your assistance against the Virith threat. You have saved billions of lives and prevented the extinction of multiple species. You are welcome, Vance replied simply. However, Cromoth continued, we must also address the obvious question that weighs on every mind in this room. You want to know if humanity intends to replace the Virith as the threat to galactic civilization, Vance said calmly. The silence that followed her words was answer enough. Vance looked around at the assembled delegates and saw the fear they were trying to hide. Fear of the species that had just demonstrated power beyond anything they could counter. Let me be very clear about humanity's intentions, she said firmly. We do not want to rule the galaxy. We do not want to conquer or dominate or control any of your species. And we have absolutely no interest in becoming the very thing we just destroyed. Then what do you want? The Voss delegate asked. Vance smiled, and this time there was warmth in the expression. We want a seat at the table, not the head of the table, but a place where our voice can be heard and our concerns considered. She began to count on her fingers as she listed humanity's desires. We want trade agreements so our economies can benefit from interaction with yours. We want cultural exchange so we can learn about your species and share our own history and art. We want scientific cooperation so we can continue advancing together rather than in isolation. And yes, we would appreciate an apology for the whole quarantine situation, though that is not a requirement. Desernine felt hope rising in her chest as she listened to these reasonable requests. That is all? She asked. That is all, Vance confirmed. Humanity does not want to dominate anyone. We just want to make sure the galaxy survives long enough for everyone to figure out why we are all here and what we are supposed to do with this miracle of existence. She extended her hand toward Desert-9, palm open and fingers spread in an ancient human gesture of peaceful greeting. The Virith are gone from this system, but their hive worlds in the void between galaxies will need to be dealt with eventually, and humanity will handle that when the time comes. You would continue to protect the galaxy? Cromath asked with surprise. Even after how we treated your species? Of course, Vance replied as if the answer was obvious. Because that is what you do when you have the power to protect others. You use it, not for reward or gratitude, but because it is the right thing to do. Desert-9 looked at the extended hand and thought about everything the gesture represented. The species that had built weapons capable of ending existence itself was offering peace and friendship with an open palm. The violent primitives that the Concord had feared and isolated were offering to be protectors and partners. The humans who had every reason to resent the elder races were offering forgiveness and cooperation. She reached out and took the human's hand in her own, feeling the warmth of living flesh against her cool blue skin. On behalf of the Galactic Concord, she announced loudly enough for every delegate to hear, "I welcome humanity to the stars as full and equal members of our community." Applause erupted from the assembled delegates, tentative at first and then growing stronger as the reality of the moment sank in. The galaxy had changed forever in the span of a few days, and nothing would ever be quite the same. Admiral Vance shook the ambassador's hand firmly, and then looked out at her fleet one more time. "There is an old human saying," she said quietly. "They asked us why we built weapons that could kill gods, and we told them it was because someday we might have to." She turned back to face the Concord delegates with determination in her eyes. "Today we proved that saying true, and tomorrow we will work to build a galaxy where such weapons are never needed again. But we will keep them ready just in case, because humanity never forgets that the darkness between stars is vast and full of things we have not yet imagined." And somewhere in that darkness, other predators took note of what had happened at Threlia, and they learned something that the Virith had learned too late. The galaxy had new protectors now, and those protectors had clawed their way up from a world that tried to kill them. And they would not hesitate to do whatever was necessary to keep the light of civilization burning. Humanity had arrived, and the stars themselves seemed to shine a little brighter for it.